It was a cold evening when I first found out. The betrayal hit me like a slap to the face, hard and unexpected. I had always trusted her, my wife, the woman I had built a life with. We had been together for years, and I had no reason to question her loyalty. But one fateful night, everything changed. The signs were subtle at first, little things like a distant gaze, late-night phone calls, and that nagging feeling in my gut. But I brushed them off. Maybe I was overthinking it. After all, love was supposed to be enough, wasn't it? I'd been out with a few friends when I returned home early one evening. There was an unfamiliar car parked in our driveway, and the light in our bedroom was on. My heart sank as I stood frozen at the door, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I walked in slowly, almost cautiously, unsure of what I would find. The sounds that greeted me from the bedroom were unmistakable. It was clear what had been going on. My wife was in bed with another man, the man who had taken everything from me, my trust, my peace of mind, and the very foundation of my marriage. My heart was racing, and anger surged within me. But there was no shouting, no confrontation. I just stood there, watching them, feeling the weight of the moment. It felt like I had been stabbed in the chest, and yet I couldn't make myself leave. I turned around and walked out of the house, the door slamming behind me. The cool night air was a relief from the suffocating feeling of betrayal that hung over me. I needed space to think, to process what I had just witnessed. The next few days passed in a blur. I spent my time replaying the scene in my head, trying to make sense of it all. Why would she do this? What had gone wrong in our relationship? I thought about all the years we had spent together, the late-night conversations, the plans for the future, the dreams we had shared. It all felt like a lie now. But what hurt the most wasn't just the affair itself. It was the fact that she didn't even have the decency to tell me. I had to find out like this, in the most humiliating way possible. I had always thought of her as the love of my life, the one person who could never hurt me. But now I felt like a fool. I couldn't just let it go. I needed to confront her, but I wanted it on my terms. I didn't want her to think she could just walk away from this without facing the consequences. I had to get my revenge. But I would do it carefully, with precision. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me break down. Instead, I would play the game, but I would make sure I won. The days that followed were filled with a quiet tension. She tried calling me repeatedly, sending texts, and even leaving voicemails, but I ignored them all. I wasn't ready to hear her apologies or her excuses. I wasn't ready to listen to the tears that I knew would be coming soon. I spent my time alone, processing everything that had happened. The anger inside me was starting to fade, but in its place was a calm resolve. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I wasn't going to let her think she could betray me without facing some kind of reckoning. I started researching the man she had been seeing. It didn't take long for me to find out everything I needed to know. His name was Rohit, a smooth-talking businessman who had charmed his way into her life. From what I could gather, he was a man who lived a lavish lifestyle, always showing off his wealth and connections. He had no respect for anyone, and it was clear that he saw my wife as just another conquest in his long list of affairs. I had to admit, I was a little impressed by how he had managed to get into her head. He knew exactly what to say, how to make her feel special. I couldn't help but wonder how far they had gone with their affair, how deeply she had fallen into his trap. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was how I would make them both pay. I spent days coming up with a plan, meticulously thinking through every detail. I didn't want to be reckless. I didn't want to rush into this. No, this had to be perfect. I knew that I would need patience, and I would need to make sure that everything went according to my design. The first step was to make her believe I was ready to forgive her. I needed her to think that she still had a chance to make things right. But that wasn't the reality. The reality was that I was already planning my revenge, and nothing would stop me from carrying it out. The first time I saw her again, it was in the living room of our house. She had called me, pleading for a chance to talk, and after some hesitation, I agreed to meet her. When she walked in, I could see the guilt in her eyes, the desperation for forgiveness. She looked fragile, like a woman who had lost everything. It was almost pitiful. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice shaking. "I never meant for this to happen. Please, I don't know what got into me." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I looked at her, studying her, taking in every detail. Her eyes, once full of warmth and affection, now seemed empty, like a person who had lost their way. Her body language screamed guilt, but it was clear that she still had no real understanding of the gravity of what she had done. "You think saying sorry is enough?" I finally spoke, my voice calm, controlled. "You think that just because you regret it now, everything will go back to the way it was?" She opened her mouth to say something, but I raised my hand to stop her. "No," I continued. "You don't get to decide how this ends. You don't get to choose whether I forgive you or not. You've broken something that can't be fixed, and now you'll have to live with that." The silence between us was deafening. I could see her trying to piece together her thoughts, trying to figure out what to say next. But I wasn't interested in hearing any more apologies. I had heard enough. It was time to make her understand that I was no longer the man she could manipulate. The days after that conversation were tense. My wife, desperate for my forgiveness, tried everything. She cooked my favorite meals, made emotional pleas, and even tried to recreate the romantic moments we once shared. She was doing everything she could to win back my trust, but all I could feel was disdain. Every word she spoke felt like another layer of manipulation, another attempt to make me believe that the affair was just a mistake, an isolated incident she deeply regretted. But it wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, one she made knowingly and without hesitation. I kept up the act, pretending to be conflicted. I would nod as if I was listening to her, as if I was considering giving her a second chance. Inside, though, I was calculating my next move, the next piece of the puzzle that would lead to her and Rohit's downfall. The more she begged, the colder I became. I refused to let her see even a hint of weakness, of the pain she had caused me. I knew that if I let her see the cracks in my armor, if I showed her any sign of vulnerability, she would use it to manipulate me further. I had to remain stone-faced, indifferent to her tears, her promises, and her apologies. One evening, after she had just finished telling me how much she regretted everything, I decided it was time to take action. I knew I had to be careful. This couldn't be a hasty move. I needed to strike when the time was right, when they least expected it. I reached out to an old friend of mine, someone who had connections to the kind of people Rohit surrounded himself with. I had done my research, and I knew that his business ventures weren't entirely legal. He wasn't a law-abiding citizen, but he was influential in certain circles. If there was anyone who could help me get revenge, it was him. I arranged a meeting, one that Rohit would never expect. The plan was simple: ruin him in a way that would make him lose everything: his reputation, his wealth, and his influence. I didn't care how it happened, as long as he was left with nothing. I knew that without his money and his status, he would be nothing. A man who relied on his connections and his ability to manipulate others would have nothing left to fall back on. While my wife remained oblivious to what was about to unfold, I put the pieces of my plan into motion. Rohit's empire was built on a foundation of lies and deceit, and I was about to tear it all down. Weeks passed, and the tension between my wife and me grew. I could tell she was frustrated by my indifference, but I didn't care. She thought that by playing the role of the perfect wife, she could make everything better. But I knew the truth. Nothing could fix what she had done. I had already made my decision, and there was no going back. Then, one morning it happened. The first crack in Rohit's armor appeared. My friend had gotten the ball rolling, and the whispers about Rohit's shady dealings began to spread. His businesses were suddenly under investigation, his assets frozen, and the authorities were questioning his every move. It was all falling apart faster than I had anticipated, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. My wife didn't know yet. She was still convinced that everything would be fine, that I would eventually come around. But the reality was that I had already won. Rohit's downfall had only just begun, and as the days passed, his empire continued to crumble, piece by piece. I watched it all unfold from the sidelines, a silent observer to the destruction of the man who had stolen my wife. And with every passing day, I knew that my revenge was becoming more and more complete. As the weeks went by, everything began to fall into place. Rohit's business ventures crumbled under the pressure of the investigations, his assets were seized, and his once glorious reputation faded into nothingness. The man who had once walked through life with an air of arrogance, flaunting his wealth and charm, was now a shadow of his former self. He was caught in a web of lies and deceit, and there was no way out. At home, my wife was beginning to notice the changes. She could feel the tension in the air, and although she didn't understand what was happening, she knew something was terribly wrong. She had no idea that I was the one pulling the strings behind the scenes. She still thought that all she had to do was show up and beg for my forgiveness, and everything would be okay again. But she was wrong. One evening, she came to me with tears in her eyes, desperate for answers. She had heard whispers about Rohit's downfall, and she was starting to realize that something bigger was happening. She could see the way I looked at her. Cold, distant, and it terrified her. I could see the fear in her eyes, and for a moment part of me felt sorry for her. But then I reminded myself of everything she had done, of the trust she had shattered, and the pain she had caused me. "I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "Why are you doing this? Why won't you forgive me? Rohit, he's lost everything. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" I looked at her, my gaze unflinching, and for a moment there was silence between us. The weight of her words hung in the air, but I knew the truth. Her pleas meant nothing to me anymore. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Rohit lost everything because of his own choices, I said quietly, my voice calm but firm. And as for you, you've already lost everything too. You just don't realize it yet. Her face paled, and I could see the realization dawning on her. She finally understood. The man she had chosen over me, the man she had risked everything for, was now a broken shell of his former self. And soon she would be too. I didn't need to say anything more. She fell to her knees, her sobs echoing through the room, but I felt no pity for her. I had spent days planning this, waiting for the perfect moment to make her feel the consequences of her actions. And now, that moment had arrived. As she begged for my forgiveness, I looked at her with cold, detached eyes. There was nothing left to say. There was no redemption for what she had done. In my heart, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. I had taken my revenge, and in doing so, I had reclaimed my power. When she left that night, I didn't stop her. There was no more fight left in me, no more pain. I had taken everything from her, and I had won. I could finally move on, knowing that she would never truly find peace, just as I would never be the same again. The woman I had loved had been replaced by someone else, a stranger, a liar. As I watched her walk away, I couldn't help but wonder, Could she ever truly regret her choices? Would she ever look back and realize what she had lost? Or would she simply blame me, as she always had, for the consequences of her own actions? And what about Rohit? Would he ever get back on his feet? Or would he remain a broken man, forever haunted by the fallout of his affair? I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that I had gotten my revenge. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Questions for the audience. Do you think the protagonist did the right thing by seeking revenge, or did it make the situation worse? How do you feel about the wife's role in this story? Can forgiveness truly heal a betrayal like that? What do you think will happen to the wife and Rohit after everything has fallen apart?